We are on item number 10, the other part of the Kingston Road site where we have infill and 5 additional units. I just want to check that the objectors, Dr. Green and Mr. McLaughlin, are here on Zoom. Are they here?
Yes, I'm still here. We're both still here.
Okay. And is the applicant Mr. Coleman and his other speakers here, Alec and Samantha?
Yes, I'm still here and Alex is still here, but I believe Samantha is unable to join for this session.
Okay. So just to give fair warning, as it were, after the officer has made his report on this particular application, I'm going to allow the objectors, Dr. Green and Mr. McLaughlin, to speak for 3 minutes each if they so wish. However long they speak for, supposing one speaks for 3 minutes and the other speaks for 1 minute, however long they speak for, it will then be for the applicant to speak for a similar length of time.
That's fine.
Is that okay with everyone? Excellent.
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Lipscombe, it's back to you to present on the application with the infill and 5 additional units.
Thank you, Chair. Members should be able to see my screen. I'll try not to labour the points which are the same as the previous application. So I won't go through the site description and surrounding buildings to quite such an extent. I'll move straight on to the proposal. Before I take you to that, I'll just take you through the existing plans so you can see the existing elements of residential and commercial. Moving up through the building, you can see it's all residential. This is where the infill extension would go. One thing I'd draw your attention to is the layout of the existing building with a single corridor bisecting the building, if you like, which has resulted in every flat being single aspect across each floor. So there we have the existing building with the existing rooftop addition and the existing building from the rear. This drawing here is not the proposal, it's the originally proposed proposal to which we had raised concerns, we officers that is, and through a lot of discussions with the applicant's architect, we have now come to this final scheme. This previous scheme had sort of a shampooed roof edges. The key issue though was this projecting stairway to the rear to provide access to the top. Luckily, the applicant has been able to make investigations and secure an extension to the existing stairwell rather than having to have this extra one on top, which would have had issues in terms of not only what the building looked like, but if you see the window tucked in away in there, quite an overbearing appearance. So moving on to the actual proposal, which is now proposed. It's for a rooftop and rear infill. It would be a total of 5 flats, so 4 flats on the roof and the 1 infill flat, which we touched on earlier. Here you can see the ground floor, which would be reconfigured to allow for cycle storage and bin storage here. The existing meter cupboard, which is located here, would be consolidated, if you like, into a smaller space, which allows more space at ground floor to provide more cycle parking and bin storage. There you can see the development in elevation form. And again, from the rear, and a balcony proposed to this unit. The other balconies are inside the edges of the building, which I'll show you in a moment. So this is the infill flat that we've looked at momentarily ago. So this is the new floor that didn't feature in the previous application. So you can see that, yes, it is a single corridor access, but the applicant has been able to secure a large unit over here, family size unit with full dual aspect. We talked about the infill unit being single aspect to the south. Units 2 and 5, as I say, over here would be this one over here, dual aspect, and this one at the end here. So the family size units fully dual aspect. Units 1 and 3 would be single aspect south facing, and those are the studio units. Also single aspect is this studio unit. This is a north facing property. As I say, the rest of the building is single aspect, but it's not something we like to encourage in new developments. As a response to that, the applicant has incorporated this enhanced window return to try and gain light where they can. But I would stress that this is the studio unit only, which is north facing single aspect. So I'd mentioned the bin storage earlier, a similar situation in that the 3 units at ground floor level would have access to that bin store and benefit from it also, and the same method of servicing from the roadside as the previous scheme. So the key issues here, which is at page 163 of the agenda, and then moving straight into design and visual impact at 164. There's a few lines from there I'd like to set out. The building is already a tall building in the vicinity and forms a focal point for Wimbledon Chase and a landmark to some extent. The building is visually prominent in the street scene with a bold and distinct front elevation. Actually, if I take you down to the visuals for the drawing, this might be better to talk through it with this on the screen. The horizontal emphasis and the width of the frontage are such that the building exhibits a greater scale than others in the immediate vicinity, but the additional height is considered to be better accommodated within this already wide building. The setback from the floors below, that's at the frontage there, would lessen the impact of the proposals when seen from street level opposite and reduce the potential for the proposals to appear uncomfortable or disproportionate in terms of scale and impact on the existing building or street scene. Therefore, officers conclude that yes, whilst this is additional height, the design of it is such that it could still appear as a subordinate element, follows on from the fenestration below. So the recommendation there is that the visual impact is acceptable. In terms of neighbouring properties, again, we have the separation distances of 23 metres to the rear boundary and 30 metres to windows on properties to the south. Again, there is the issue of balconies oversailing the unit below, but a similar relationship to the previous application. And again, I won't go through the raft of safeguarding conditions, which I'd mentioned about impact on existing occupiers. In terms of standard of accommodation, again, all units either meet or exceed the internal space standards and external amenity space. And we've already talked about the single aspect nature of some of the units. I would add to that the layout is a significant improvement over the floors below, which, as I say, were a fully dual aspect. If the building is to be developed further, this really is quite a good attempt at achieving a good degree of dual aspect units. Again, cycle parking is provided, and a section 106 to restrict parking permits is recommended. We have conditions to deal with refuse storage, sustainability, air quality, and site drainage. Again, a lot of the issues raised by objectors have been, well, they've all been carefully considered. A number of these relate to issues throughout the construction process itself, which, as I say, we've already discussed in the previous application. The conclusion at page 171 is that the proposal would be acceptable, and the recommendation therefore is to approve subject to conditions. In terms of the mod sheet, as I mentioned before, that does show the relationship of proposed balconies to units beneath, and also a drawing identifying the area of the building to be infilled with a single unit scheme, but we've already dealt with that. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chair. Sorry.
Thank you, Tim. Dr. Adams, you have 3 minutes if you wish to use it to remind us of comments you made earlier and say anything else.
No problem.
Dr. Adams?
Hi there. Thank you very much, Vice Chair. So I'd just like to reiterate that myself and Andy are representing the views of the collective of the flats, namely flat numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 19. The only flats we haven't been able to get to agree with us were the ones already owned by employees of Leos in the building. I'd like to also reiterate the issue of privacy, which wasn't really touched upon in the last planning application discussion. I know that Tim has just said that these safeguards have been addressed, but he refused or wasn't able, sorry, to elaborate much further. I think the schematic we can see clearly identifies the fact that these windows directly overlook the balconies below, and these are balconies which have been bought in good faith as private balconies for the residents on the top floor. And I believe I can see Juliet balconies for the top floor, so someone can easily stand from their window and look directly down to the balcony below. Another point that I made in the last planning application was at the rear of the building, again, conveniently left out from the plans displayed to the committee, was the issue of the skylight for the ground floor unit, which already from the second floor offers a partial view. Yeah, and again, this totally, there's a wall that obscures the ground unit in question towards the right of the building, where that balcony could have a direct line of sight into someone's private kitchen. So these are two areas of significant concern, which again, the infill perhaps doesn't impact massively, but as you can see, the extension of an additional floor would impact greatly. And once again, it's not just the concern of privacy, it's about overcrowding of the building. We did mention issues of noise and the bins, mainly because it's clear that the building as it stands is already suffering issues with overcrowding. We do not believe the additional resources offered by the plans are adequate, given as the current facilities are not adequate, and therefore not in a position to be adding more residents to the building, as all the residents will ultimately suffer from the lack of adequate bin access and lift space. And I will yield at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Mr. McLaughlin, do you wish to speak for up to 3 minutes, please?
Yes, if I may just add a few additional points, yes, please.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Essentially, building on the points that Adam had raised, I would first like to underline how it does come as a surprise that the service department at the council seem to think that the bin storage is sufficient in the planning application that's proposed. In what Tim kindly displayed earlier,
Speak a bit louder, please.
Sorry. Yep. Okay, will do. In the bin storage that's proposed, it is not much larger than the current bin storage that we have, which I would actually refute the understanding that with the infill proposal, it will be sufficient. They are adding considerably large amount of people that are going to be living in this area, and to have a bin storage area that is only marginally bigger than the current one, it is clearly going to be a cause for future problems for both the residents and the council to deal with that issue. One issue that I will say has been addressed is that there was a concern about the decor of the extension, and it's good to see that has been updated in the plan to continue with the Art Deco feel of the building that we had purchased. And whilst I also take the point of the councillors that the precedent that is potentially being set here, it might not necessarily be a point for planning application, but just to reiterate that as someone who's recently bought a new build house in this borough, to go through this and understand that from a planning point of view, you are completely hopeless and completely paralysed to do anything to battle your house becoming a construction site for a year after a year of buying it. While I again concede that is something that you wouldn't necessarily consider, is extremely disheartening to hear, and I hope that there is something that you can do to potentially reconsider that. Otherwise, I too also use my time. Actually, one final point that should jump into my mind.
You're fading away again.
Sorry. One final point that has jumped into my mind. I believe on the last application, the applicant had considerably greater than 6 minutes to make their point. Whether that's just a point of administrative issues, I'm not entirely sure, but I did feel that was slightly unfair. But that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's now up to the applicant to respond if he wishes to. The objector spoke for 4 minutes and 41 seconds, according to my stopwatch. So the applicant can speak for the same time, Mr. Coleman, Alex, and Samantha, and Alex, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you.
Okay, you have 4 minutes and 41 seconds.
So thank you, first of all, to the councillors that spoke in the last application. I think, you know, the mention of how much the building offers in terms of its placemaking and the facade and how we've improved it is much appreciated. And I think, you know, that's really one of my main points here is that we actually, we worked with the placemaking officer very, very closely. And you can see from the designs, you know, the sort of design evolution that's been shown, that we've made lots of changes. One of them, as I said earlier, is the Art Deco kind of style to sort of, you know, come through to the new extension mainly from the road elevation, the roadside, this view here. And it definitely accentuates what's already there in the existing building, which in itself accentuates what was there originally when it was built so many years ago in the original building. So we've also worked to the rear, as mentioned by Tim, to remove bulk and remove any issues with sunlight, daylight. Yes, there is a balcony. Balconies are very important for amenity. And we have, you know, very late on in the process, we looked at this and we thought, okay, well, it's probably worth spending a bit of time to do a sunlight daylight analysis on that balcony. And with our analysis, it was very, very clear that according to BRE guidelines, the sunlight daylight factor is actually just under twice what is required. So it's you know, it's a big improvement on the standard requirements for sunlight daylight. It's facing south, and yes, there'll be, like, you know, a very small amount of overshadowing when the sun's very high, but that's it. And that's only to one room in that flat below. All respect to the people below, it will affect them to some degree, but not in terms of sunlight daylight. I won't talk about you know, construction disturbance. That is a reality of this sort of building, but, you know, essentially we are planning to do this very straightforwardly and quickly to reduce the impact on our residents. And, you know, I'm sad to hear that there are residents that are unhappy with the building. A lot of love and care has gone into producing this building, and, you know, things like, you know, the bin store itself is one of those things that has come up. And, you know, we've worked very closely with a specialist bin consultant, waste consultant, and the waste team with the council to come up with a solution that's actually quite specialized. I know it doesn't seem like it, because, you know, the existing one is just a bin store, but we've got the recycling, it's a very, you know, clever system in there, and it's accessed from the street side rather than down the alleyway, which vastly improves the accessibility of it as well. So I would say, yeah, there was a mention also of the flats that weren't included in the opposition being owned by employees. I can assure you that no employees of our company have any ownership of any leases in this building at all. So that's an untruth. I'm actually going to hand on now. So just where we are now, look, essentially, I think it's a fantastic building, and I thank you for your support. I'm going to hand on now to Alex. Alex, are you there? Alex, are you there? Just give me 1 second.
Hello. Oh, sorry. There we go. I'm in. Finally, I was having struggles there. Apologies. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can.
We can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you.
You've got 1 minute and 20 seconds.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, just to first of all just touch on, I am Jewish myself, and so is the developer. I've personally never had a problem, so I just want to get that through. I've always had a great relationship. The developer itself has promised new lifts as well, so that will add value. So I just want to say thank you very much to Leos for that as well. I'm personally myself very sustainable, so I don't like to use a car, and I do see other residents at the train station as well. There's fantastic transport links there, most residents being kind of young professionals, so I've never ever had an issue in that regard. The bin store location Don't get me wrong, it's not ideal. However, I have seen the plans to kind of move it to the front of the building instead of the side. And for me as well, that will add huge convenience and hopefully to other residents as well. So I could take the bin on my way out to work and not have to trek to the side of the building in that regard. The location itself is awesome. I work in Waterloo, and I've never had a problem with getting into work. In fact, the journey itself is an easy one, and it's a thriving area, and I'm really happy to be part of that growth as well. So, like I said, as a resident here, I'm really excited, and I just want to say a big thank you to the developers here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just in time. Excellent. Mr. Liscombe, would you like to add any comments on what has just been said?
Only a couple of points to come back on, Chair. I do note the comments from the objectors about privacy in terms of looking down to balconies, not balconies, to the roof lights below. In a suburban environment, there is always going to be a degree of intervisibility. When it becomes materially harmful in planning terms is what we need to be sure of. On that basis, a dormer window in almost any property might be considered to be overlooking to the neighbour's garden, or overlooking down to a single story extension with a roof light in it. Any property that was subdivided into flats would presumably suffer the same incidents, with one property above another being able to look down into the part of the property below. Members will need to come to their own judgment on that, but given the angle of viewing and the fact that the entirety of the existing building would share similar views, it's not something that in planning terms we could reasonably defend. I have looked up. I have the email dated 15th of March 2021. The waste management team responding directly from Ndudi to say that they are happy with the arrangements proposed. In terms of the planning process and the inability to protect against a new home becoming a building site, I do have sympathy with the objector. As I mentioned, it is the government's intention to optimise building on tops of blocks of flats, and that's why they brought in a new recent prior approval approach. The planning process is fairly limited in what it can consider, and there's a whole range of other legal issues which surround the development of a building as well as planning permission. If there is an agreement in place between the residents and the owners that no more building work shall continue, planning permission wouldn't trump any other legal restriction. So the granting of planning permission, as I say, is not an ultimate permission, or doesn't convey an ultimate permission to develop land if there are other legal obstacles. However, I am straying out of the planning circumstances here, planning material considerations. But I would just share that thought. Other than that, I have nothing further to add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tim. We move to members' questions. Councillor Alan Brutus, then Councillor Southgate.
Well, thank you. Just to be consistent again to the officer, but you don't have to go through them all. But is it the case that, again, with this application, there are 16 to 17 impressive conditions attached? As I said, don't go through them all again, but just confirm to us if there are equally same number or roughly the same number of conditions.
Thank you. Yes, more or less there's a similar number of conditions. Whilst the information they have to provide back may not be quite as onerous because there's less development to cover, it is effectively a similar batch of conditions there with the same intention of safeguarding the construction process, amongst other things. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Southgate.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Experience over the best part of 20 years tells me that we've often added stories. I'm thinking particularly of blocks along Walpole Road, and I personally have come to regret it. They've looked looming and over large and unbalanced. So I'm really looking for some reassurance here that if I'm sitting having a coffee at the Costa across the road and I look up, how much of that new floor will I see? To what extent will it be by virtue of the setback, and also the sort of is that a light railing along there to you know, to break the view a little bit? I just want some reassurance on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a view that I can show you sort of from the position of ground level opposite. If I stop sharing my screen for a moment, I do have a number of plans which include a section drawing showing the relationship of the proposal to buildings opposite. That's not included in the presentation just for sheer sort of information overload. But if you bear with me, I will look that up, and I can show you how it would sit in the street in comparison to buildings opposite. One point I would mention is that the building would be set back the top floor is already set back 1.5 meters, so that does have quite a significant effect when viewing from street level in terms of how overbearing and dominant it might appear. Sorry, I'm almost at the point. There's a number of documents to scroll through. Creating a canyon effect has been something that we've been looking at, and is something that we would be concerned by were it to happen. However, in this case, given the width of the building, the height of the horizontal banding, which almost gives a disproportionately wide appearance to the building as currently stands, that we think that it can accommodate this additional bulk without appearing intrusive within the area. Sorry, I'm very nearly at the bit I need to be at. Now I'll share my screen now. A number of the drawings from the design and access statement relate to the original layout. So you can see the relationship here. If you ignore this bit on the back, the overall bulk and mass of the roof extension is similar. So you can see over there that's the relationship, but I'm afraid I don't have a view that I can show you which shows it much better than that, I'm afraid. So I'm afraid you will have to make the judgment as it stands. Thank you, Chair. That's the end of my answer, unless members would like me to clarify further.
I think, Tim, what we'll just do now is we'll let Mr. Lewis show us the street scene on Google, which might answer Councillor Southgate's question. I think
Yes,
you're going to have to come out.
Sorry, I've just found a drawing, which could I show it momentarily before Jonathan shows that?
Okay,
and I think it will assist. This is what I was looking for. Again, it shows the previous scheme, but you can see the relationship here, not dissimilar to the height we have here. This building would be marginally taller because it has one floor, which is very large. But you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this side. So hopefully that is helpful to members. I'll remove that now and let Jonathan share it on Street View.
Are you comforted by that, Councillor Southgate? Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Any other questions, members? Comments, please. Councillor Alambitis.
Yes, as I said, I want to be consistent with these two applications. I'll be voting to approve, to go with officer recommendations. I like the Art Deco, I like the design, I like the sunlight aspect. It's 4 flats, 1 infill, 5 more flats that we desperately need. Thank you. I'll be voting for this.
Councillor Southgate.
I'm supportive, Chair. Just one caveat, really. I mean, the issue of waste storage does seem to be something that needs to be kept under review, and I do know how disruptive as these things can be between tenants, unless they can be resolved. Perhaps in the past, any problems were resolved by fly tipping around the recycling bins in the co-op car park, but that option has now been withdrawn. So there is a need to get that right with 5 additional units, but subject to that, yes.
Thank you. I think we should now move to the vote. The recommendation is to approve, subject to a Section 106 agreement and conditions outlined in the report pack. Can I see all those in favour, please? That's 6 in favour. Any against? None. Not voting. 2. So the application is approved, subject to Section 106 and conditions. Thank you. We now move on to item 11, 81 to 83 Wimbledon Hill. Mr. Bryson, I think this is you to present.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Off you go.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the application site is at 81 to 83 Wimbledon Hill Road in Wimbledon. It currently comprises a early 20th century building, which is currently divided into 5 2-bedroom flats. Located on the north side of Wimbledon Hill Road, adjacent to the Wimbledon Hill Road conservation area. The surrounding area is predominantly residential. To the west lies a block of flats known as Bluegates. To the north, block of flats known as Harroding Court, and to the east, 2-storey residential dwelling houses known as Leeward Gardens. Opposite the site is a Grade 2 listed building referred to in the report as the White House. Talking through some existing plans, the existing building on site has a small basement and 2 to 3 floors above. It also has single-storey garaging here, existing vehicle access with parking for several cars. So looking through the floor plans, first floor and roof plan. The building has been unsympathetically extended over the years at the back, the large flat roof addition. So from the street, as you can see it here, the existing access. So it's a building with features. It's not locally listed or a listed building, and it is outside of the conservation area. The proposal itself, this is the proposed site block plan. Proposal is for a full redevelopment of the site to provide a block of flats for 17 flats within, 3 3-bedroom units, 10 2-bedroom units, and 4 1-bedroom units, plus a 3-bedroom detached dwelling located, you can see here, to the east, which would be single story above ground and basement level. So talking through the floor plans, the proposal includes a basement with a basement car park and split level accommodation for some of the units. Access to the basement will be via a car lift at the front. The basement will provide 9 parking spaces, with 2 of them to be for disabled. All car parking spaces would be have electric vehicle charging points. Accessibility within the flats is lift throughout. Turning above to ground floor level, the existing access would be retained and reused. The car park there is just where the proposed car lift would be. The flattered building would be slightly curving within the site as you go back in, with the front door entrance accessway significantly set back. 2 front gardens provided for this flat, and communal rear gardens at the rear. The flatted accommodation is generous throughout in terms of floor space. Each flat would have an outdoor roof terrace area. So looking through the floor plans further up. With the top floor set back in from all sides, with roof terraces here and here. This plan's rather useful, just shows distances to boundaries from the proposed buildings. This is the proposed elevation that would face the road. The building, in terms of materials, would be red brickwork, would feature textured brickwork as well, cement cladding panels, metal windows and glass balustrades. So a modern contemporary approach. There's a large glazing for each. You'll note, members, on the plans I'm showing you, there's a dotted outline. That is the originally submitted scheme. And so the proposal has reduced the height and bulk since the original submission through amended plans. Just going through so looking from the proposed rear elevation, as you can see here, the single-story detached dwelling house here. Proposed northwest side elevation. The building, in terms of its side-on views, has been broken up in terms of bulk and mass with various aspects, such as the curvature of the building as you go into the site, the setback in the middle, and some of the windows here and here. Turning to the southeast facing elevation, the other design has taken into account the difference in land levels between this site and Leeward Gardens, with the use of limited windows on this side of the building to restrict overlooking issues. And that's the proposed elevation again, with showing the single-story dwelling house here. Some section drawings, just assisting with some of the building height aspect. The basement, obviously fairly deep on one side as it cuts into the ground. You'll note that the council's flood risk officer and structural engineer have been consulted on the application. That shows you the single-story detached dwelling house to the southeastern part of the site. In terms of the comparison to the existing building, this drawing here shows obviously the existing building outline in black and the proposed above. In terms of heights, the existing building has a ridge height of 11.5 meters, and the proposed building height for this scheme would be 15.2 meters. The applicant has submitted some CGI visual aids with the application. So this is a view from the front with some of the tree foliage in the foreground and without. Just to give members an idea of context of what is proposed. And from the rear, as outlined before in terms of materials, red brickwork with cement cladding panels on the sections that come out onto the side to help break up the bulk and mass, and the green roof proposed for the single-story dwelling house. Some site pictures as a view from across the road. Apologies, the pixels haven't come out very good on that. So this is a view from towards the front of the site, looking down towards the rear of Leeward Garden properties that face the application site. From within the application site, looking northeast, showing the existing garaging that is currently present and hard standing. Looking south, so what you can see there is the first floor windows in the rear of Leeward Gardens. At the rear, Harrowdean Court, beyond to the north. At the rear here, looking north, that's the side elevation of the flats known as Blue Gates. And again here. If I draw members' attention now to the modifications sheet, members will note that officers put in a replacement paragraph with regards to daylight and sunlight. There is also now a schedule of accommodation showing the flat sizes, and also an additional condition recommended for ecology and biodiversity enhancements. Overall, Chair, officers recommend permission be granted subject to conditions under Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We have two objectors to speak on this item. The first person to speak is Mrs. Powsall-Smith. Are you there, Mrs. Powsall-Smith?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. You have 3 minutes. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Please start now.
In the short time allotted to me, I will simply remind you of some of the many aspects of this planning application that breach current planning policy, as outlined more fully in my email to each of you earlier this week and submitted formally to the committee as well. First, it would provide no affordable housing. Second, it would include 9 off-street car parking spaces in a development that should be car-free and would involve a huge basement excavation project largely to accommodate them, since the underground car park would take up more than half of the basement. Third, the Metropolitan Police's designing out crime officer judges the layout and orientation of the 2 linked apartment blocks to be unsafe and recommends that these be changed. Fourth, no fire statement has been submitted, not even with the amendments. Fifth, the disproportionate height and massing of the 2 linked apartment blocks in relation to the lower placed houses of Leeward Gardens immediately adjacent to the development site would produce an overbearing impact on these homes, one compounded by the addition of the standalone house running right along their boundary for more than 20 meters. Sixth, it would result in an unacceptable loss of light according to building research establishment guidelines for several windows in several rooms, including major ones in several dwellings in the adjacent Blue Gates apartment block. Seventh, in the judgment of Merton Council's own tree officer, it would involve the removal of a number of trees whilst providing little opportunity for the planting of new ones to replace them. Eighth, no precondition survey has been carried out to determine the likelihood of seasonal shrink swell subsidence on neighboring buildings as a result of the huge basement excavation project. And ninth, the protracted demolition, excavation and construction work would cause prolonged and often unbearable disturbance to anyone living or working nearby. In the CGI view of the proposed development that I sent you and that I also submitted formally to the committee, you can get a sense of how overbearing the proposed development would be when seen from Leeward Gardens below, and also how ugly it would look. And please bear in mind that the view there represents the main building's true facade, which is on the side elevation, not at the front of site. Please also note that in the developer's own CGI views from the street, which you have just seen during Mr. Bryson's presentation, the standalone house is shown in the wrong place. The proposed development breaches too many planning policies, and most of these breaches result from the planning application's overdevelopment of a small site. Moreover, many of the problems raised are not ones that can be dealt with simply by applying a condition, as is suggested all too often in the agenda's report. They would need to be addressed before, not after, granting planning permission. I would urge you to refuse such permission accordingly and to advise the developer to come up with a more policy-compliant design. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The other objector to speak is Mr. Tony Anderson. Are you there, Mr. Anderson? Ah, I see you.
Can I? Yes.
about 3 minutes to speak starting now.
Okay, thank you. As you know, this item was postponed from last month's committee, apparently because an amended light study had only just been published. We find it therefore somewhat surprising that the planning officer's report itself has not been updated since then. In a spirit of cooperation, we and other residents had drawn officers' attention to areas in the report, including factual errors and appearances of bias, in the expectation that the advice presented to you this evening would reflect the new situation. It doesn't. Instead, we have a report that on one hand informs you clearly that the proposal breaches a wide range of council and London plan policies, including design, mass, bulk, including no assessment of the risk to the occupants of fire, and in particular provides no affordable housing whatsoever for the borough, one of this administration's key strategies really. Yet on the other hand, the advice is still to approve the application. Even though, as my colleague has just said, the Metropolitan Police judged the location of the main entrance on the side to be unsafe and that it was likely to increase local crime. It should be changed, but it hasn't been. We, as the local residents, shouldn't have to live in the face of increased crime in our neighbourhood. As for the light study, our professional light surveyors have reviewed both the original and the amended report. Their conclusions, which we have shared with you, suggest an overly positive interpretation of the raw data. For instance, it designates as moderate a 50% loss of daylight and tries to show that in the amended application that shifting this massive block closer to Blue Gates will give those residents more light. That just lacks credibility. But even so, the daylight sunlight study shows that many windows in Blue Gates will lose between 1/4 and 1/2 of their daylight, and several living rooms will be left with less than 10% of external light. That is surely unacceptable. Finally, I can only repeat what we have been saying all year. The development will have a massive impact on the lives of the local community. It is immense, grossly intrusive, and robs us of much of our privacy. Anyone buying the top floor flats will be able to look out into our living rooms, our kitchens, and even our bedrooms, in some cases from a distance of only 6 meters. That's about 20 foot between here and the end of those desks down there. Residents will have to tolerate 5 stories of flats looking straight down into their gardens. It cannot be right to approve a scheme that entails such an extraordinary loss of privacy, loss of enjoyment, and outside space.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. It's now the opportunity for the applicant to respond. Is Mr. David Norris here? I see Mr. Norris. You have 6 minutes to respond, starting now, please.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to take the opportunity to respond to the points raised by the 2 previous speakers and wholeheartedly support the Planning Officer's report. It is important to state that the scheme that you see before you this evening has evolved in close consultation with the planning officers over the past 10 months, and whose aim has been to create a high quality development that responds to the character and amenity of the area, has a positive impact on the streetscape, and provides an exceptional place for residents to live. There's a significant under-delivery of housing nationally and particularly within London. As such, current planning policy is very clear and requires developers to make the most efficient use of land in sustainable locations to ensure the delivery of new homes. The site is in a highly sustainable urban location, being just outside of Wimbledon town centre, and is within a short walk to the main train station and the shops and amenities of Wimbledon. The site is within the public transport accessibility level 6A, which is very high. Over the past 15 years, 60% of new homes in the borough have come from small sites, and it's imperative to ensure that optimum use is made when they become available. We therefore took the view that we had to reach a balance whereby the most efficient use of the site had been made, but at the same time had respect for the adjoining residential developments in terms of the size, design of the building, and the impact on residential amenity. We consider that we have found this balance, and this view is supported by the officer's recommendation for members to approve the application. We are proposing 18 new units, which is a net gain of 13 for the borough. Importantly, 4 of these are family sized with 3 bedrooms or more. Conceived as a modern interpretation of the traditional London mansion block, both in form and materiality, the arrangement of the proposal on the site has been carefully appraised in context to the built form of the neighbouring buildings and the location of existing mature trees. The development will be of a high quality, and consideration has been given of how each element junctions with one another to create a building that will age gracefully and be a long-term asset for the local built environment. Further consideration has also been given to minimise the impact of surrounding dwellings by controlling the views out from the new block and to minimise overlooking. The street frontage would also be further enhanced through the replacement of a tatty wooden fence with a new brick wall and piers with wooden entrance gates. When viewed from Wimbledon Hill Road, this development will be perceived as 3 stories plus a setback 4th floor. The lower level will not be seen due to the careful use of the levels and the slope of the land. This is clearly shown in the street elevation. It is completely in keeping in scale with other developments on Wimbledon Hill Road and relatively modest when compared to many. The land slopes down and away from the frontage towards the rear of the site, so the building will be seen as 4 stories and a setback 5th to the rear. This is in keeping with its neighbours such as Howarding Court and Bluegates, which utilise the slope of the land in its natural dip in the topography. The building has been carefully positioned within the site, as can be seen from the planning drawings, and clearly sets out the distances to boundaries and the relationships to the surrounding buildings. As can be seen from these drawings, the proposed building will afford relatively generous distances to boundaries with adjoining properties and create opportunities for additional planting and trees. The front elevation accords with the building line for Wimbledon Hill Road. The careful siting of the building and its distances from boundaries ensures that the daylight, sunlight and overshadowing to neighbouring gardens and windows remain largely unaffected. The applicant has provided a comprehensive daylight, sunlight and overshadowing report. In accordance with BRE guidelines, the results confirm that the scheme will have a negligible or no perceived impact on the Leeward garden houses and the Howarding flats. The scheme may have a minor impact to 3 windows on the side elevation of Bluegates and a moderate impact to 2. These windows, however, are small side windows to the kitchen and second bedroom to these flats. The main reception and master bedrooms of these units face Wimbledon Hill Road and are completely unaffected. In summary, out of a total of 85 windows assessed, 80 will see no discernible effect, 3 may see a minor impact, and 2 a moderate impact. With regards to overlooking, I refer again to the block plan which was shown earlier. 4 of the existing flats of the site currently have living room windows directly facing the Leeward garden houses. The proposed scheme, however, now has only the secondary bedroom windows on this elevation. There are small set-in deep reveals and angled away. Overlooking between the site and Leeward Gardens will therefore be reduced from the existing. To the rear is Howarding Court, which is orientated away from the site. The majority of flats at Howarding look out over Leeward Gardens and to the southeast. The nearest windows to the far left of the block are good distances away, and there's a row of mature trees separating the development. There is no overlooking issue here. Bluegates was built with secondary side windows overlooking our site. This proposal, however, will not overlook due to the use of obscure glazing and other window treatments restricting any direct views. The applicant has consulted with the climate change officer for the borough who support the scheme. The scheme proposal will result in a 64% reduction in carbon emissions. This is a very substantial betterment on the minimum target of 35% in CO2 emissions set up by the borough. This will be one of the leading environmentally efficient schemes in the borough, and the applicant will also sign up to the Be Seen, Be Green energy monitoring scheme. The scheme is to provide 9 underground car spaces. 2 of these are dedicated solely for disabled users. The remaining 7 are to be largely benefit the 4 family-sized units which the scheme is providing. It is practical for families in Wimbledon to be part reliant on transport by car. The majority of units will be car-free, and each space will be provided with electric charging points. With the car parking underground, the remainder of the site can be fully landscaped for communal gardens, which will provide a safe and secure area for the residents and families to enjoy. This also sets the scheme apart from the other schemes on Wimbledon Hill Road, which have large areas of hard-standing surface parking. All delivery vehicles will be able to pull into the site and turn around within the service courtyard, and the scheme has the support of the Borough Highways Department. In conclusion, the proposal makes efficient use of this previously developed site by creating a high-quality development that will positively enhance this part of Wimbledon Hill Road without harm to current amenity or highway conditions. It will make an important contribution to Merton's housing target, and as such, we hope that you will support the planning officer's recommendation and approve the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Councillor Daniel Holden would like to speak on this matter. Councillor Holden?
Thank you, Councillor Crowe. Good evening, planning colleagues again. I'm here tonight to side with my residents to oppose this application at 81 to 83 Wimbledon Hill Road. You would have received lots of emails and correspondence from residents detailing exactly why the scheme should be refused. What is proposed in this application is far too big and will have a detrimental impact to the existing residents joining the scheme. In balancing up the pros and cons, it is clear to me that the cons and the negatives significantly outweigh any of the pros of the scheme. The only pro argument is a few extra homes. The negatives of this application include loss of light and loss of privacy. I've stood in the gardens of the garden flats at Harradine, which only have single aspect south facing outlook. These flats at the lowest elevation of Harradine will be severely overlooked by the proposed scheme. The gardens will be overshadowed, as will the rooms inside the apartments. The higher floors will be overlooked, despite what the report says, with a significant loss of privacy and harm the residents' right to enjoy their own amenity space and peace and privacy. I've also viewed this from Leeward Gardens, which sits lower down the hill, and the situation there is just as dire, as their gardens and rooms will be faced by and enclosed by a massive building, which will cause significant loss of light and privacy, and again will harm the residents' right to peaceful enjoyment of their homes. And for Blue Gates block, which sits just north of this site, the application will actually harm them even more so. The application scheme has many failings when reviewed against the London Plan 2021 and Merton's own existing plans. The scheme has a surprisingly large number of parking spaces, in excess of the own mayor's direction of travel for a location with a PTAL of 6A, which should be for car-free development. The application is a very large, dense overdevelopment of the plot and far too big for the site it sits on. It also does not sit well with the scale, mass and rhythm of the streetscape on that side of Wimbledon Hill Road. The application itself very clearly fails the affordable housing test. The Mayor of London expects schemes to provide at least 35% affordable housing. This has 0% and no contribution in lieu. I could go on, but time is short, so I'll simply ask you to refuse the application, as it results in a loss of privacy and creates an overbearing sense and presence to the detriment of neighbours' living conditions. Policy DMD2 might be a good one to go on, or simply because the scheme fails to provide sufficient affordable housing and no contribution in lieu of, therefore contrary to the London Plan Policy H4.
Thank you, Councillor Holden. Mr. Bryson, would you like to comment on what has been discussed?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So with regard to affordable housing, the application has been accompanied with a viability assessment, which has been independently reviewed by the council's viability consultants, and they have agreed that the scheme cannot provide affordable housing. With regards to the parking provision, the existing site does contain hard-standing parking for several cars for the 5 two-bedroom flats. The application was submitted before the new London Plan was adopted, where under the previous London Plan, it had a maximum of 1 space per unit, albeit discouraging parking spaces on site. The provision proposed includes all the parking spaces to be electric vehicle charging points, and also to provide the 2 disabled spaces in accordance with policy. So a balance has to be struck between the provision of the parking in relation to the existing site. With regards to the fire statement, again, the application was submitted prior to that requirement, and so, however, officers have recommended a condition to ensure that is submitted to us prior to commencement of works. Regards to daylight sunlight, we do have differing professional opinions in the reports from the applicant and from third parties, as opposed to assessment of the tests. The applicant's one, he submitted one which has looked at the windows in the surrounding and garden spaces, albeit not having not been to each individual house or flat to look from each individual room. So a judgment has to be taken by officers in regard to the overall impact. With regards to overlooking an interaction, the southeast facing elevation has a reduction in number of windows on that side. The top floor balconies are set back with the thickness of the wall and planting. The building height is acknowledged that the building is bigger and taller. However, New London Plan policy looks at small sites and for councils to utilise small sites to deliver housing as set out within the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tim. Members' questions, please. Councillor Christie, Councillor Draper, Councillor Pearce, Councillor Alan Vittis. Councillor Christie.
Thank you, Chair. I want to understand a bit more about the lack of affordable housing provided in this application. So in the report, paragraph 7.10.2, it indicates the viability assessments provided both by the applicant and then the subsequent one carried out independently. Can the officer just confirm if those viability assessments are showing the prospective deficit if affordable housing was included, or they're showing what the deficit is without affordable housing? And then I may have a follow-up.
Chair, it's the assessments have been done. Sorry, bear with me. So it is, the assessments are done as such that they're appraised looking at the policy position from the outset, but in terms of the actual figures within there, that is done showing without affordable housing being able to be provided. So that is what those figures are based on. The council's viability consultant has outlined to us the reasonings for such a difference in conclusions in terms of the actual figures there between the council's assessor and the applicants. But he's outlined that it's due to various differing professional judgments on inputs and assumptions in the appraisals, such as car parking revenue and program timings, ground rent, for example. So that is why there is such a difference between those. But the key aspect is that the council's viability assessment consultant has concluded that the scheme does show the deficit, albeit closer to the line than what the applicants were showing.
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow-up. So, you know, I find it quite astounding then that the applicant could submit a viability assessment that suggests even without affordable housing, that its own development would lead to a deficit of 3.89 million. The council's independent viability assessment, at best, you know, reduces that deficit by 3.7 million. But I kind of, that doesn't give me any confidence in any of the viability assessments, if I'm honest. And so I just kind of don't believe that developers are willing to produce or build these developments on a sort of on the, you know, on the path to making a loss. So can you assure us that in the event that if this application is approved and it gets built, that there is a robust mechanism for a sort of you know, clawback and ensuring that a appropriate contribution towards affordable housing in the borough is made in the event that there is a profit on this development?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we are applying the early and late stage review in accordance with the Mayor's SPG, as also recommended by our viability consultants. So that would be captured within the Section 106 agreement, should consent be given this evening.
Councillor Draper.
Thank you very much, Chair. And to be quite honest, it's very much on the same kind of level. I mean, there's first of all is the rhetorical question that I'm not going to expect anybody to answer. Is that, you know, if you're going to make a loss of 150 grand by building this, you know, why would you build it in the first place? You're not doing it at the kindness of your heart, are you? But that is rhetorical. The real question, I suppose, I'd ask is, £150,000 isn't a vast amount of money, but we know that they're also they're planning to put a huge basement in this with for space for 9 cars. If you didn't have the basement with the space for 9 cars, well, that's going to take away the loss, isn't it? Why is the basement there as part of it? Why has it been costed to include these really elaborate and frankly unnecessary additions?
Chair, if I may, the basement cost aspect, yes, that is part of the cost review and part of the process has been reviewed by our independent the council's consultant as well in looking at the viability. They're aware of the plans and what is proposed, and within that, for example, if permission was granted this evening and the applicants came back to remove the basement under a variation application, that application would be subject to a viability assessment and it will be reappraised, and it would be a new assessment would essentially take place if that assists.
I'm going to ask Mr. Lewis to comment on the viability before we move on.
Sorry, I wouldn't normally want to sort of pitch in where Tim's presenting an application, but I still feel that there's something of a misunderstanding about profitability and viability for larger schemes. When we talk about viability, as part of any financial assessment, the RICS Red Book provides various industry sort of benchmarks against which developers can calculate developments. And in terms of development profitability, you can have a range of between 16% profit or 20% profit. You can imagine on a large scheme of 20 or so flats in Wimbledon, the differences between the two could be quite significant. So it's quite feasible for a developer to cost out a set of proposals and say that in terms of the certain inputs that they've made, which are perfectly legitimate because there are sort of margins either side of those figures, you could have a scheme which was less profitable than the independent assessor might come up with, but still couldn't deliver a viable scheme, because remember that at the end of the day, the developer is entitled to have their reasonable profit from a scheme and deliver the affordable housing. So I think this, when we talk about a scheme not being viable, it doesn't mean it's not profitable. It means that within those tolerances of between 16 and 20% profit margins, the developer's saying, I can't meet those standards. So a developer might come away with sort of saying, well, I'll achieve 14 or 15%. But that actually falls below what the industry benchmark is to try and get developers in. So I know profit's something sometimes we might struggle with, but that's how we get these sort of rather bizarre outcomes coming. So sorry to intervene across Tim, but I just thought it might help.
Thank you, Jonathan. So we're taking Councillor Pearce, then Councillor Alan Bittis, and then Councillor Christie again. Councillor Pearce.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got one question and one comment. The distance between the existing building and the proposed building is approximately 6 meters. What is the officer's judgment on the line of sight in those two? And the comment is, picking up on what Nick has said, it seems to have more concern about finding 9 parking spaces than they do in the benefit of having space for children to play and to do what kids always do. That seems to be the wrong balance. And one comment on what Mr. Lewis has said, I always thought, going back, that that benchmark profit was 12.5%, and very few developers actually complained about 12.5%.
Thank you, Chair. Regard to the distance from the in comparison to the existing building, I think it's probably best to share my screen. Bear with me. So, Chair, this diagram here, for example, shows the position of the proposed building as viewed from Wimbledon Hill Road in comparison to the existing. Yes, so that the building largely is shifting, increase in bulk and mass further northwest, which is further towards the boundary with Bluegate's flats beyond. But I think some of the key aspects in terms of our judgment. If you bear with me, I'm just going to get to the right plan. So in terms of our judgment with this application, it is on slightly lower ground than the flats to the northwest. So the building has shifted slightly further across, and in doing so, although it does that, much of the elevation is staggered in terms of its design. So in terms of help breaking up the bulk and mass, flatted developments are quite common in this area. Obviously, we have the ones to the north and ones to the northwest and northeast. But in terms of that judgment, looking at distances, this flatted scheme is reasonable proximity to the boundary. So although it is going closer than the existing, and in combination with the uplift in height and mass, and rear front building line, in and around, officers are satisfied that relationship in future would be an acceptable one in between the sides of buildings. What we've have to weigh in the balance considerations here is that it's a small site and increase in density is encouraged. In terms of national policy on daylight and sunlight aspects, the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework, at paragraph 125C does outline some guidance on this, and it outlines local planning authorities should refuse applications which they consider fail to make efficient use of land, taking into account the policies in the NPPF. In this context, when considering applications for housing, authorities should take a flexible approach in applying policies or guidance relating to sunlight and daylight, where they would otherwise inhibit making efficient use of a site. So although it's an uplift in scale, bulk and mass on this site, we, in and around, we consider the balance here is acceptable. So I hope that's assisted in sort of how we've come to our judgments on this particular scheme.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Alan Peters.
Thank you. Two quick questions. Just for the office to remind us what this is replacing. I understand it's a ramshackle house and 5 modest self-contained flats in a quite an affluent area of the Wimbledon village. What is it replacing? Just confirm that. And my second question is, of course, we all want more affordable housing. Can the officer tell us about the, I don't mind the early stage review, I don't care about that one, the late stage review, given that inflation is up, materials costs are up, delivery costs are up, and what is the prognosis for a late stage review when we could be seeing some more profit and therefore the possibility of monies coming to the council? Thank you.
In terms of what the scheme's replacing, it's a early 20th century building, which is currently 5 2-bedroom flats. It's an old building. It has a sort of poor design of an extension at the rear, but it is a building with on a decent size site with lots of hard standing and garden at the rear. In terms of the early and late stage reviews, late stage, apologies, Chair, bear with me. The late stage review is done once 75% of homes are sold. So the benefit of that is that when it is reviewed once some values have been known and achieved on the site and costs incurred, the guidance is such that the outcome of this is likely to be off-site contribution for affordable housing, but yes, the late stage review is to be secured within the legal agreement.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Christie, then Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Chair. It was just, perhaps I should have asked it straight after Mr. Lewis spoke, but it was just in relation to what he said about the difference between profitability and viability. So to clarify then, these deficits that are listed in the report, they're not proposed losses, they are deficits under the threshold of minimum 16% profit. Is that right? So, so I suppose what I'm asking then is, I suppose what I'm saying is that kind of hardens my view about this, that it's even more, to me, it seems reasonable that a contribution towards affordable housing should be insisted on at this stage. I mean, I might be saying this here and it's probably not very much you're able to do about it, given it's national standards that apply, but it just seems even less palatable to me if that's the case.
At the moment, Councillor Dean. Mr. Lewis, do you want to comment on that at all? Tim, do you want to comment on what Councillor Christie has just said?
Chair, to be honest, I mean, in terms of the nailing down the numbers, I mean, the officers we put this in the report because of the difference is quite large in between the professionals in terms of the viability.
Can I summarise as it is that the viability study has shown that the development is 4 million short of achieving a 17% profit. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, Chair. Essentially,
we don't know what the X is on this formula, but if you had 18 flats in Wimbledon and you look to say they were £1 million each, that's 18 million quid revenue. They need to make a gross margin of 20% of that, which is about 3.6. Yeah, give or take. Just depends how you want to look at it. And what they're saying is they're 3.89 million under that, which means it's an actual loss, aren't they? So, frankly, I don't want to make comments yet, but we have what this full council has passed, which is to say that if there's more than 9 units, as in 10 units, there should be affordable homes. And what you've heard from current councillors here is they're saying that the cost is going into things which are irrelevant to the provision of housing.
Thank you for that explanation, Councillor Dean. Are there any other questions?
So
You have a
light.
question, yes.
So are the words minor and moderate when it comes to daylight and sunlight, are these technical terms, are they legal terms, or is just some descriptions of the organisation that conducted the light survey?
Chair, those are technical terms from within the daylight and sunlight studies. So both the applicants' daylight sunlight reports refer to that, and the third parties as well.
In terms of, let's use the word moderate, what percentage reduction in light can you have if it's moderate? What's the biggest percentage reduction in light when it's moderate?
Chair, unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that question. I can outline which of the windows in the neighbouring.
I'm just interested in that question. I mean, because the objectors have said that sometimes there's an 80% reduction in light. Is that something that you recognise?
No, Chair, not an 80% reduction in light, no.
How much, Tim?
Well, Chair, so in terms of the habitable windows tested, if they retain over 80% of their former daylight value, then they've satisfied the guidance under the BRE guidelines. Now, some of the windows do fail. For example, the worst comes out at 61%, and then up to 75%. But in the submission, the applicant's daylight sunlight report is outlining that that's 5 windows out of 85 which were assessed in the surrounding neighbouring properties.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dean? Oh, well, no, I'm just check. Are there any other questions from colleagues? No? Okay, so we move on to comments. Councillor Southgate, Councillor Dean, Councillor Draper, Councillor Alan Brittis. Councillor Southgate.
Thank you, Chair. Let's try and be succinct. Really 3 reasons why this should be reviewed. First, the absence of affordable housing. And if you think it through, developers are encouraged to overpay for sites because they know that they will be able to tell us they cannot afford our policy requirement on affordable housing. Therefore, in effect, it is those in need of that housing who are subsidizing the developers' overpayment for the site. And that's a serious matter. Number 2, Underground car park, this should be permit free. The PTEL rating is 6A or something. Anyway, it's very, very high. The answer to Councillor Draper's question is that those parking spaces will be worth a fortune on the price of the flats, but on a purely practical level, a lift-served underground car park, basement car park, frequently goes wrong. I have a constituent in that position. They are a really bad idea, but it should be permit-free. I mean, what signals are we trying to send out about our commitment to climate change if we allow this development in an area of such high transport accessibility? The third point, which hasn't been discussed so much, but it's the topography of the site, and it is the effect of this looming block on the properties in Leeward Gardens, which, with their rather short back gardens, a little bit like, Waits houses, it's all very well talking about 20-meter separation distances, but if it's at that angle rather than straight across, it is looming and unneighbourly and ominous. And for that reason too, that's my third reason why I think we should be refusing this.
Councillor Dean?
Yeah, I understand why Councillor Southgate is saying this. I think the first point is when somebody says to you, they're going to make such substantial losses, and I accept profitability versus viability, gross versus net, then it stretches the credibility. And I think when somebody has such an enormous loss, I start to question many things. And I accept what the officers are saying about light, but we talked about 61% reduction in light. Now, I accept there are some councillors who say you don't have a right to light, but we have the opportunity to keep light for people. We don't have to take that light away. So if the developer is going to make an enormous loss by providing affordable homes, which every single councillor here says we should provide affordable homes. This is not a political thing. This is what we all believe in. It can't make money. It makes a big loss. It has to take light away from others, and it is overlooking. And we've had the conversations about car parking as well. I don't see why we should accept this. I don't have any issue with redevelopment of the site. When the objectors say that it would be wrong to get rid of what we've got, what Councillor Alan Brittis is saying is right, is that it doesn't provide something that is brilliant or wonderful. So there's no issue in terms of redevelopment. But what we see is there is too much height because it's on a hill. There is too much bulk because it's taking away light and it is giving overlooking. And I'd like something to come back which has some affordable, whatever it is, to at least appease our beliefs and what we've signed at council. So I think we do need to reject it under what Councillor Southgate has said. And we do want something to come back which is a bit smaller. And people should have a right to daylight, and there should be some affordable homes.
Thank you. Councillor Draper?
I'm afraid I can't be as eloquent as that. As far as I'm concerned, it's a hideous building and therefore fits in with the surrounding buildings far better than what is currently there at the moment. But I don't mind either that a developer is going to get disgustingly rich out of building it. But what I do mind is the idea that all of that can be done while taking no notice of people who actually need, real people that actually need to be housed. And there are elements in this, and I appreciate exactly what Councillor Southgate said about making a filthy profit out of parking cars. But if you didn't build the car park, you'd have a much cheaper development, and the much cheaper development, according to the financial viability, much cheaper development would be able to provide that affordable housing, particularly if, as what Councillor Dean says, you'll be talking about selling the non-affordable ones at £1 million each. So I think we should send it back on that basis, that we need a plan which is simpler and in itself more affordable, so we can provide affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alan Peters?
Thank you. Yes, I'll be voting for this application purely on the fact that one ramshackle house, 5 modest self-contained flats in a very good area of Wimbledon will be replaced by 17 flats, 3 3-bedroom flats, 1 3-bedroom house. I regret the lack of affordable housing, but I am encouraged by the late viability that will take place once there's been a sale. This planning applications committee has rejected applications for up to 850, 650, 350 units with affordable housing in comments with largesse and by lay people with their own prejudices and statements. We have here a developer who wants to improve an area. Yes, we need more affordable housing. If we as a local authority look into these small developers for that affordable housing, then God forsake us. We need this government to step up and provide the resources, the funding, the scale of building that we need for affordable housing. We shouldn't be expecting it from these small developers. I, for one, will be voting for this.
Thank you very much. I think we should now put this to the vote. The recommendation is to approve subject to section 106 agreement and various conditions set out in the report. Can I see hands for all in favour, please? 1, 2. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4. Not voting? 2. So the outcome of the vote is that the recommendation is rejected and this application is refused permission. Oh. We now have to agree the grounds for refusal. I think Councillor Southgate might have some grounds. I remember that Councillor Holden mentioned some grounds. I think DMD2 sprang to mind.
You carry on, Chair. You're doing.
Oh, I'm doing well, am I? Okay. Well,
no, I think the points really that concern us most are the absence of any affordable housing, the bulk and mass, particularly relative to the properties in Leeward Gardens, constituting an unneighbourly form of development, and I would also cite the fact that it really ought to be car-free to be consistent with our, particularly in an area of such high transport accessibility, and if it's to be consistent with our aspirations for climate change. Perhaps Mr. Lewis will tell me I can't put that last one in.
I think we certainly have overshadowing and loss of light, which you mentioned, and the inconsistency with our parking policy, car policy.
Yes, Chair, if I may. With regards to bulk and mass and impact on neighbouring amenity, yes, that is a matter of judgment. I think the committee need to be specific to which neighbouring properties. There's essentially three separate groups of properties in the surroundings. You mentioned Leeward Gardens. So I'll just confirm: is that the main concern with the impact on Leeward Gardens only?
Well, my colleague Councillor Dean says also there is loss of light to Blue Gates, which we should include.
Blue Gates, yep, okay.
Is Blue Gates, yeah.
With regards to the basement and the car parking specifically, yes, that is more of a conflict, I guess, against the new London Plan policy on car-free development within the PTAL of 6A in this location. that would be my guidance on that particular reason, rather than a sort of a design policy reason, more of a conflict with the aims of recently adopted car parking policy from the London plan.
Okay, Tim, I think the committee is happy with that approach to rejecting it. Affordable housing, I think, is being cited. Ms. Lewis. Did you wish to say something, Mr. Councillor Dean?
Yes, second.
I think that concludes this. Just been advised we need to vote on the refusal, the wording of our refusal. So can I see hands for all in favour of the wording as stated? Do you want to summarise that, Mr. Lewis? No, I don't think he does either. But I still think it might be useful. Do you want to some thinking time?
It's bulk and massing, and that's specifically for Leeward, and it's overlooking and lack of sunlight for Blue Gates. It is lack of affordable homes, and it is not a car-free development. They are the three areas that we're looking at.
Chair, I advise also with regards to the lack of a signed 106 agreement for the heads of terms within the report as well, which is the carbon offset contribution. So it's important there.
And of course, if it comes back with providing affordable monies, it doesn't always. Developers can cut this in different ways.
So can I see a show of hands in favour of the wording of the refusal? 2, 3, 4, 5 in favour. All those against? None against. All those not voting? 1, 2, 3. So the wording is approved. One more thing.
Can I just suggest that the reasons for refusal are drafted by the officers and then placed before the chair and vice chair before any decision is issued?
That's agreed. Thank you. So our final application this evening is at Commonside, East Mitcham. Who is presenting on that, please?
That's me.
Ah, hello again, Jordan.
Hello, I've been around.
Right, off you go.
All right, I think you all can see my screen now. Actually, I'll go up to the top. So this is a site here. It's at 441 Commonside, East Mitcham and Pollard's Hill. And the applicant proposes for the demolition of the existing single-storey dwelling house and the erection of 7 two-storey dwelling houses laid out as a terrace block. The application also includes parking, hard standing, landscaping, and cycle and refuge storage. So you can see the site here. It's very square in its shape, and it's about 35 meters across this way and 35 meters in its width as well. And then, of course, the site also includes an access way that the applicant owns, and it runs between these two properties into the main road of Commonside East. I'll just go through because there's an area of the scheme here. So this is the bungalow that's currently on the site, single story, and it's got 2 bedrooms, and it's got a detached double garage here. The rest of the site is mainly just grass, a couple of ornamental trees, and it's got hedges around the outside. To the south here is Mitcham Common, and then you've got kind of buildings of kind of the post-war development era built along here. So there are 2-storey terrace houses, gardens at the rear. Same sort of formation along Kingston Road. To the north of the site, directly north, are allotment gardens. And then to the west is also kind of just pretty common detached terrace housing as well. You can see to this part of the site, there's a new recent development that was granted in 2016. You can see by this photograph that it's being built at the time this photograph was taken. So that was a row of 6 houses. Yes, 6 houses, all of them 2-story, and the 2 bedrooms with gardens at the rear. And then you've got car parking on the site. And I've accessed from this part of Commonside East. And then in terms of the proposal is for the demolition of this bungalow building. And then of course, the redevelopment to provide a terrace row of 7 houses. And in terms of its layout, it'll be laid out north to south in direction and basically parallel to the new development that's been built from the 2016 permission that you saw on the photograph. And then the gardens for this site are at the rear, and they're back onto the gardens of this house here. So a pretty kind of conventional layout. And then you've got parking on the western side. There's 7 car parking spots, which is the 7. So the same amount as the number of dwellings to be built. The site isn't in a great PTAL score either. It's actually 0, so it's the worst score. So it does need to have parking facilitated through the development. And then you can see around the outskirts, you've got a bit of landscaping, gardens here for the homes, as well as cycle storage and refuse storage. And the applicant also proposes to upgrade the access lane as well, put in kind of traffic calming measures. So in terms of the gardens, they all meet our policy plant level, so they're all over 50 square meters. And then in terms of the housing plans, they've all got the same sort of layouts. They're all 3-bedroom over ground floor, first floor, and loft level. So ground floor has living and dining and kitchen areas, and then the upper stories have the bedrooms, bathrooms. And that's a shot of the loft level with the bedroom utility space in it. And you can see the row of roof lights that feed the bedrooms and utility rooms of the upper story. So this is the proposal here. That's kind of configuration with the valley roofs. Then also side angle view as well of the elevations. And then of course you can see an artist's impression of the development when it's built. You can see kind of the architecture that's being used, the way that each of the houses are kind of defined by the different sort of patterning. They've got kind of punctuating windows to provide kind of a bit of architectural interest, and the recessed kind of entrance space to each of the homes. And then you've got the car parking to the front with some landscaping as well. Then in terms of some of the site photographs, this area over here, again, the new development to the east. This is looking from the site towards Commonside East. There's another shot here. This is the bungalow to be demolished, and you can see the row of houses behind. So you can kind of note that the design of the applicant's houses is kind of similar in its style to what's being delivered on the site itself. So this is the recent development, and that's taken from kind of the front garden of the site looking towards Commonside East. So this is the driveway that will be upgraded, and it's a condition to get the details approved and then delivered before any occupation of the units. And this is a good shot of the bungalow with the garage to the side. Let's go back to this artist's impression again. So you can kind of see how the development is kind of there to almost mimic the proposal that's beside it. In terms of heights of the building, they're comparable to the development beside it. They're about 50, I think this one here is 54 centimeters taller than the neighboring development. We don't think that's going to be of a scale to appear obtruse or to appear too abrupt. And the reason why it's slightly taller is because they want to provide a loft level bedroom. So these homes would be 3 bedrooms rather than 2 bedrooms, which was the other development beside it. And then in terms of the site plan here, they've provided split path analysis of all the car parking to show that you can get in and out in a forward gear. The distances between houses are adequate. They're all at least 20 meters between the habitable rooms of the terrace behind, which is, in our view, enough to provide satisfactory distance to prevent kind of any undue overlooking. The bulk and massing isn't kind of tall enough to create kind of undue kind of shadowing or loss of light to these houses. Because these houses are north facing of the houses and the other houses along the terrace down here, there wouldn't be any real kind of material loss of light either. We don't think it will enclose any spaces. They provided a traffic impact assessment as well that's been reviewed by our transport officer. So cars would come and go using the accessway down here. And because there's only one car park per unit, numbers that come in and out in terms of the vehicle movements would be at least relatively modest. And we didn't think that number would be harmful for us to kind of refuse the application of transport and highways terms, and our highways officers have agreed with those thoughts. We've also got conditions in place to provide information about the sorts of trees and planting that be retained, because we know that there's some planting along here that provides some screening between 2 houses, this development here and the development to the east. So it'd be good to get some of that retained. It's not on a flood risk zone, but they've also provided a flood risk assessment that's been looked over by our flood risk engineers, and there's a condition in place that locks in those flood risk details, I think, as well as floods as well, so sustainable urban drainage. The recommendations to approve, but it's to approve with conditions, but also we want to get a section 106 agreement in place that's to do with refuge. Just because in terms of getting council's refuge officers have looked at the plans, and it's not possible to provide refuge trucks into the site because the distance on the accessway is too narrow for the refuge trucks to accommodate it. And on top of that, it's not practical for someone to expect someone that's living in these houses to have to move their rubbish all the way down to Commonside East, because of the distance, the drag distance is too excessive. It's about 50 meters. And on top of that, even if they were to put their rubbish down here, because it would be sited on quite a narrow accessway, it would effectively block cars coming in and out of the site. So the developer's been in contact with a private refuge company called Grundon's, and they've provided, I've shown the council as well, the kind of details of service that can be provided. So they've agreed that they can collect refuge and rubbish weekly from the site. We've seen the cost as well, and the applicants agreed that they're reasonable for them to be provided. So the section 106 would effectively be there to secure private refuge for the lifetime of private refuge collection for the lifetime of the development. And the section 106 would also kind of formulate the precise arrangements that are going to be there, as well as a contingency in place in case there was any kind of interruption or it stopped happening in the future, so that the council knows what's going on and also has something legally that's there that's kind of pushing the developer to find someone else or to find another solution for the waste collection of the site. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordan. There are no speakers on this, so we'll move to questions, please. Councillor Dean.
Very sensible, just the application. So the only section 106 money is for the refuge. There's nothing else for anything else in terms of local amenities?
No, there isn't. No, and it's not a major scheme either, so there's no affordable home contributions.
Councillor Peters.
Yes, I like the previous one. This is getting rid of a ramshackle house to provide urgently needed housing. Can we just vote for this, please?
Just finished questions first, okay. Councillor Pearce.
Yes, I wonder if the officers would like to comment on the fact that on page 51, no, it's not 51, anyway, it's in there. There is 4 measurements, and one of them is the width of the houses are going to be 4.9 meters. My understanding would be that I would suggest that the average width of a terraced house is nearer 6 meters. Now, being cynical, I would say that to get a 7th house on this spot, if you go down to 4.9, that gives you 6 meters to spare to get an extra house on that row. Is that to try and improve the amount of new homes, or is it just to maximize the developer's profit?
Well, I'm sure, to answer the question, I'm sure schemes always come forward for a reason. And I'm sure they always come forward to make sure that they maximize the profit of the developer. But then again, often, you know, the approach that developers want in terms of optimizing a site and making the most in terms of providing housing is often things that the council really works to push as well. So we're trying to optimize site delivery as well. And from looking at the plans and the way they've kind of architecturally done them, we think that the development, you know, would be a compact development. I agree, but I don't think it would be cramped in the way that it's being built. And on top of that, in terms of looking at the measures from London Plan standards, that all the units that are being provided either meet or exceed. Most of them exceed. I think they all exceed actually as London Plan standards. So for us, you know, it seems like a good scheme to endorse. On top of that, you're also getting 3 bedrooms for each of the units. So it does provide family size accommodation on the site.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any comments, please? Shall we move to comment, Councillor Draper?
Just to say, it's actually rather pretty, and it's a shame that it's got parking in front of it, but I can see why it's necessary, and it's really the kind of thing that we should be looking at more. Frankly, it's a lovely idea. I'm going to vote for it.
Thank you, Councillor Draper. I think we'll move to the vote now, although the recommendation is to approve subject to a Section 106 agreement for private refuse collection. All those in favour? Oh, that's 8. So that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We just move on to item 12, Planning Appeals Report. Is that noted? Good. Item 13, Planning Enforcement Report. Is that noted? Good, thank you. I think it just remains for me to thank everyone for their attendance here tonight, to wish you a good morning and to close the meeting. Thank you.